Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take your sources, pull out the key insights, and hopefully make it all engaging, maybe even a little fun.
That's the plan.
So, have you ever felt like parenting is just, well, an uphill battle? Especially, when you're trying to instill something really good like gratitude.
Oh, absolutely. It's a common feeling.
It feels like we're constantly pushing, teaching, reminding. But sometimes it seems like the harder we push, the more resistance we actually get. We all genuinely want well-adjusted, thankful kids, right? But it feels like the traditional methods often just backfire. You end up with frustration or maybe even like outright rebellion.
Yeah, it's a real struggle for a lot of parents.
It really makes you wonder, what if our whole approach, our fundamental way of teaching what we think of as goodness is actually, flawed from the start?
That's a huge question, and it's exactly what we're digging into today. In this deep dive, we're going to unpack some really fascinating insights from a source that definitely challenges a lot of the conventional wisdom. Not just on parenting, actually, but on deeper stuff like grace and even human nature itself. We'll explore why our attempts, often really well-intentioned attempts, to kind of force gratitude can produce the exact opposite effect.
Right, the backfire effect.
Exactly. And by doing that, we'll hopefully uncover a more profound understanding of what true lasting gratitude really looks like when it's nurtured through a completely different lens. So yeah, get ready for maybe a bit of a perspective shift.
A shift in how we see our role and maybe God's role too in raising kids.
Precisely. Our mission here is to give you that shortcut, to being really well informed on this with insights that might just change your whole approach.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our source points out this core problem, something almost universal. Parents really want grateful children. I mean, who doesn't?
It's a natural desire.
Yeah.
Healthy, even.
But the paradox, the tricky part, is that the very methods we often use somehow seem to lead to more ingratitude, more defiance.
It's so counterintuitive.
Think about it. How many times have you heard, or maybe even said yourself, with the absolute best intentions, I'm doing this for your own good, you should be grateful?
The classic line.
And it just falls completely flat. Or worse, it causes deeper issues like resentment or this heavy sense of obligation or just, outright defiance. It's such a common feeling that your best efforts just aren't landing.
It really is. And it's more than just a feeling. Our source argues it's a profound truth. What's really illuminating is this idea that even with the best, most loving intentions, using the wrong methods can accidentally lead to deeper bondage, not freedom.
Bondage, that sounds strong.
Oh, yeah. And it's not just about parenting either. It's presented as a universal principle for how we understand human nature and spirituality. The core argument here is that what the source calls the law.
And by law, we mean rules, commandments, standards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Rules, commandments, dictates external standards.
Yeah.
That this law actually stimulates the desire to sin.
Whoa, hang on. Stimulates sin? How does that work? That sounds backwards.
I know, it's deeply counterintuitive, isn't it? But the idea is, when we explicitly teach good or set up these strict good behaviors, it can paradoxically make people lean towards the opposite. It sort of highlights or even awakens the underlying corruption, the inherent human bent towards self-will. Makes it more obvious.
Wow. It's almost like a psychological trigger. It reminds me of that classic thing, right? If I say, don't think of a pink elephant, what's the very first thing you think of?
A pink elephant. Every time.
Right. It's that kind of inverse reaction. The very act of forbidding something or demanding something can heighten the awareness, maybe even the desire for its opposite.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is that this isn't just, some obscure theological idea. Our source points out that there's a kind of historical and philosophical consensus here.
Really? Like who?
Well, spanning various cultures, schools of thought, from ancient Greek philosophers right up to modern psychology, there's this long observation of the paradox. Just telling people what's good or right often only makes them better at acting good on the outside.
Performing goodness.
Performing, exactly. Rather than genuinely transforming them inside. It highlights this fundamental thing about human nature. Outward conformity just doesn't equal inner conviction. So, what does this mean when we look at specific scriptural insights?
Yeah, let's get into that.
Okay, so to really get this, our source points us to Hebrews chapter 5, verses 12 to 14. Now, context here is absolutely crucial.
Okay.
This passage wasn't written to, say, Gentiles or brand new believers who didn't know the scriptures. It was written specifically to Jewish believers.
People who grew up with the Old Testament.
Exactly. People deeply familiar with the Old Testament, the law, the covenants, the rituals. Understanding this audience is vital because it means they were already steeped in what our source calls a law-thinking mindset.
Okay, law thinking, meaning they thought goodness came from following rules.
Basically, yeah. They were brought up to believe that their goodness, their standing with God, was measured by how well they adhered to the rules.
Got it. And there's this phrase in Hebrews, elementary principles of the oracles of God. That sounds important.
It's central. Our source clarifies that this phrase, which pops up again in Galatians as elementary principles, refers explicitly to the law itself.
So the law is like the basic ABCs.
Kind of. So for these Jewish believers, going back to these elementary principles meant going backwards, regressing to that law-thinking mindset. It's like trying to go back to kindergarten after you should be in grad school.
You're stuck on the basics when you should be moving on to deeper stuff.
You got it. And this leads directly to that milk versus solid food analogy that gets talked about a lot, but maybe often misunderstood.
Right. Hebrews 5.3 talks about needing milk, not solid food.
Yes, and being one who needs milk and not solid food signifies spiritual immaturity. This person is described as unskilled in the word of righteousness. Now, what's fascinating is how the source defines righteousness. The original Greek word is dikaiosine.
Dikaiosine, okay.
It's presented not as something you earn by, meticulously checking off boxes and following rules, but as a profound gift from God, something received, not achieved.
A gift. That's a huge difference.
It's fundamental. If you don't grasp this truth that righteousness is a gift, not a reward for your performance, you're still on milk. Spiritually speaking, you haven't moved beyond those elementary principles.
So solid food, then in verse 14, that's for the mature. For those whose senses have been trained by practice to discern good from evil.
Exactly. And that maturity, according to this understanding, doesn't come from perfectly following a checklist. It comes from understanding and operating within grace. It's a completely different framework, a different operating system for understanding goodness and our relationship with God.
It sounds like a shift from doing to being.
That's a great way to put it. That law-thinking mindset, it's characterized by intense self-focus. It's always what I must do, how I must behave to be acceptable. Am I measuring up?
Always looking inward, judging yourself.
Right. And crucially, it's also deeply marked by self-condemnation when you inevitably fall short, which everyone does. This was the dominant mindset for those steeped in God's law. They were constantly evaluating their own performance against these external rules and, well, judging others by the same standard too.
But here's the big twist, the shift in understanding you mentioned. The law's true purpose, as our source really emphasizes, wasn't actually to make people righteous in themselves.
No, not at all.
It was to make people acutely aware of their sin, like a diagnostic tool.
Exactly like a diagnostic tool. It showed the problem. The Pharisees and scribes, though, in their self-righteousness, they completely missed this point. They believed they were inherently good because they kept the law, or thought they did.
And so they looked down on everyone else, the sinners.
Precisely. So misusing the law, believing it makes you righteous, actually traps you in that milk status. It leads to this kind of spiritual infantilism where you never grow beyond just superficial performance and rule keeping.
Wow. Okay, so what happens if someone hasn't truly grasped this idea of righteousness as a gift, if they're still stuck in that earn it mentality?
Well, what's fascinating here, and maybe a little confronting, is that if someone hasn't truly received righteousness as a gift, if they haven't embraced that profound truth deep down, they will inevitably attempt to earn it.
Makes sense. If you don't think it's free, you try to pay for it.
Exactly. And this leads directly to what our source calls pretended righteousness, or, hypocrisy, just like the Pharisees demonstrated. When we, or our kids, set these external standards and strive really hard to meet them, our underlying motivation often becomes about being perceived as good.
By others, or even just by ourselves.
Both. Being seen as good rather than being driven by a genuine internal goodness or love that just flows from within, it becomes a performance, putting on a show.
That connects perfectly with what Jesus said, right? In Matthew 6.1, he called people out for doing good deeds just to be seen by others and get praise.
Yes, absolutely. Even in religious or moral contexts, like teaching kids to be grateful or honor their parents, the underlying motivation can subtly shift. It can move away from genuine character development towards just seeking external validation.
So it's not about the real character, the heart of the matter, but just the outward show, putting on a good face for everyone.
That's the danger. And this isn't just about, ancient Pharisees or obvious religious hypocrisy. The Apostle Paul, a man who had, meticulously tried to keep the law before his conversion, he had this profound revelation about this struggle that resonates so deeply with our human experience.
You're talking about Romans 7.
Exactly. Romans 7:18-19. He laments, "For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing."
It's such a relatable struggle.
It really is. But what's the evil he's talking about there? Is it just failing to do good? Well, our source suggests the evil that accompanies his desire to do good is precisely that subtle, often unconscious desire for others to see his goodness. Or even just for him to validate his own goodness, to earn approval, whether from God, others, or himself. It's that internal, self-focused drive that can corrupt even the purest intentions.
So this pursuit of outward goodness, this drive to appear righteous, our source calls it a mask of virtue. And parents might unknowingly put this mask on their kids.
That's the idea. Think about those sometimes awkward moments when you might force a shy child to say hello to relatives they barely know, or insist they give a hug or perform for visitors, even when they're clearly uncomfortable or just not feeling it.
Yeah, we've all seen that, or maybe done it. The intention is good, right?
Yeah.
Teach politeness.
The intention is usually good, yes. But what often gets produced is a superficial act. It's a performance primarily for the benefit of the adults, for appearances, true character, genuine gratitude, real politeness that comes from the heart. It just can't originate from that kind of external motivation or forced display.
It's like putting a really nice, shiny coat of paint on a crumbling wall. Looks good for a moment, but the underlying problem isn't fixed.
That's a great analogy. There's no real substance within, which is why it's so crucial to understand the law primarily as a revealer, not a reformer.
A revealer, not a reformer. Okay.
Galatians 3, verses 23-25, says that before this way of salvation by faith came, people were essentially held captive under the law. They were confined until the coming faith would be revealed.
Held captive. That sounds pretty restrictive.
It was. And our source expands this idea of the law beyond just the specific Mosaic Law given to Israel.
Right. You mentioned this earlier. It includes any moral code.
Yeah, all moral codes, traditions, customs, basically anything in your mind that dictates this is right, that is wrong, whether it's a legal code from society, a cultural expectation, or even just your own internal ethical compass, your conscience.
Like Romans 1-3 talks about how everyone, even without the specific law of Moses, has the sense of right and wrong.
Exactly. Romans explains how all humanity lives under some form of law, even if it's just their conscience. It's this inherent sense of right and wrong that, paradoxically, constantly points to our inability to perfectly live up to it.
So it's not just the 10 Commandments we're talking about here. It's any internal or external framework we use to judge ourselves and others to define what's good or bad.
Correct. And the fundamental human misunderstanding, the trap we fall into, is mistakenly believing that the law actually improves us. We see outward changes in behavior. Maybe someone stops doing something bad or starts doing something good, and we think, see, the rules are working.
We judge by appearances.
We do.
Yeah.
We tend to judge by external appearance. Like you see someone donate millions after a disaster, and we instantly label them a hero, right? We laud them without necessarily questioning the source of the funds or the real motivation behind it. We're just so easily impressed by superficial displays, by that outward goodness that the law can produce.
But God sees the heart.
Precisely. And God's purpose, his intention with the law, was never for it to make people good in themselves. If the law could do that, Jesus' sacrifice wouldn't have been necessary, would it?
Good point.
Instead, God knew the law would actually stimulate those sinful desires we talked about, and it would reveal the inherent corruption within. It's like, imagine a perfectly polished, seemingly clean mirror. You might look at it and think it's spotless.
Okay.
But then, if you shine a powerful ultraviolet light on it, and that light is like the law, suddenly every single fingerprint, every speck of dust, every invisible smudge becomes glaringly obvious.
Wow, yeah.
The light didn't create the dirt, did it? It just made the existing dirt abundant and evident. That's what the law does with our inherent sinful nature. Romans 5:20 says, the law was added so that the trespass might increase.
Increase the trespass. That sounds bad.
It sounds bad, but it means it made the sin more obvious, more abundant, more evident. It didn't create sin, but it made the existing sin impossible to ignore. It shone a massive spotlight on our true, desperate need for a completely different kind of righteousness, one we couldn't manufacture ourselves.
Okay, this is where it gets really, really practical for parents, I think.
Wow.
Galatians 3.24 calls the law a tutor or a guardian. So the law was our guardian until Christ came that we might be justified by faith. Our source applies this directly to parenting, doesn't it? When parents tell kids, be grateful, that's what a good child does, they're essentially giving them a law.
That's the argument, yes.
And this law, even if said with love, isn't going to produce genuine gratitude.
According to this perspective, no. Instead, it will tend to expose the child's underlying lack of it, or maybe trigger their inherent resistance to being forced into a performance. It doesn't actually make them better. It just makes their natural bent, their inner state, clearer. It reveals their need for something deeper than just rules.
This really highlights that fundamental difference you mentioned between God's logic and our usual human logic.
It really does. Our human logic, our default setting is be good to receive good, right? So we think if my kids are grateful, then God will favor them. Or maybe just then I will favor them, I'll give them the reward. Yeah. If they obey, they get the treat.
Standard cause and effect.
Yeah. But the Bible says God is kind even to the ungrateful. God's logic, as revealed in grace, is essentially the opposite, and it's revolutionary. Because you are not good, because you fall short, you need my grace.
That difference in logic, it explains so much about why our best parenting efforts sometimes backfire, doesn't it? We're trying to operate on one system, maybe the human logic system, while reality or God operates on another.
Exactly. We're operating on a different OS than God's grace-based system, and that's why those phrases like, I feed you, I clothe you, I pay for everything, you owe me respect. Or teachers saying, your parents work hard and pay for your schooling, how could you behave like this? Why they often don't foster real gratitude.
They foster resentment instead, or just a feeling of being burdened.
Often, yeah. Or just a sense of obligation. The law, when applied that way as a demand for payment, it triggers that inner sinful desire to resist, to push back against the obligation. It's like a pressure cooker, you know? The more you try to contain something with rules and demands, the more it wants to explode, or at least just festers inside as resentment.
And this ties into what the source calls works for wages.
Directly. Offering rewards for good behavior, get straight A's, and you get that new video game. Yeah. Or clean your room without me asking, and you get extra screen time. This whole system cultivates a mindset of self-righteousness, even in a child.
How so?
Because the child starts to think, consciously or unconsciously, I did this thing, I performed, so now I deserve this reward, this blessing, this grace. It becomes a transaction.
I earned it.
I earned it. And Paul tackles this head-on in Romans 4, verses 4 and 5. He makes it incredibly clear. Now, to the one who works, his wages are not counted as a gift, but as his due. It's what he's owed. And to the one who does not work but trusts God who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as righteousness.
So true gratitude, the real deal, it can't be earned.
Cannot be earned.
Yeah.
It's presented as a spontaneous, joyful response to unearned, undeserved grace. It flows from grace. It's not a payment for grace.
So the law then, in its true function, it leads us to Christ not because we succeed at keeping it.
Definitely not.
But because we fail, we realize we just cannot keep it perfectly.
Exactly. It's a road of disillusionment with our own ability. It's designed to drive us to abandon all attempts at self-righteousness and to seek Christ instead. If we hang on to the idea that we can achieve righteousness on our own, through our own efforts, our own rule-keeping, we'll never truly come to Christ, because deep down, we won't feel we desperately need him.
So the law shows us we're spiritually bankrupt, and then points us to the only one who can actually provide what we need.
That's the essence of it. Which leads beautifully into Galatians 3:25, which declares, but now that faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian.
No longer under the tutor, the law. That sounds liberating.
It is. It's meant to be a profound liberation. Our source explains that God's discipline, for believers, it's understood differently in this context. It occurs not primarily for sin itself, but when we are still operating under the tutor, meaning still stuck in that law mentality, still trying to earn God's favor, still relying on our own efforts, not yet fully living in the freedom of Christ.
So the discipline isn't just punishment for messing up.
Not in the way we typically think of punishment. Its primary purpose, according to this view, is to prompt us, maybe like a loving parent gently guiding a child, to leave the law mindset behind and come fully into Christ, to experience true freedom and operate under grace.
So it's not about being disciplined for every single mistake, but more about being disciplined because we're stuck in that law mindset itself, because that mindset actually blocks us from receiving grace and blessings.
That's the idea. The law's consequences when you live under it include problems, struggles, maybe even what the Bible calls curses, a lack of experiencing God's grace freely, and hindrances to things like healing or blessing. The logic is, if you try to be justified by the law, you're essentially cut off from the benefits that flow from Christ and his grace.
So the goal of any divine discipline is always to move us from that performance-based law system to the relationship-based Christ system, from performance to reliance.
Exactly. Our source is really clear on this. God does not discipline believers for sin in a punitive, legalistic way. His discipline isn't like a judge handing down a sentence. He disciplines because people remain stuck in the law mindset. And that very mindset hinders their reception of his grace and blessings. It prevents them from experiencing the fullness of his life.
So the point is always movement towards Christ.
Always. Think of it like a loving parent gently nudging their child out of a dark, shadowed corner and into the warm sunshine. Not because the child did something inherently evil in the shadows, but because the parent desperately wants them to experience the fullness of the warmth and light they're missing out on by staying there. It's a huge mindset shift for many people.
It really is. But it sounds like there's almost a trap within grace itself. Our source mentions this, right? Some believers, after they grasp this amazing concept of grace, they accidentally create a new law for themselves.
Yes, this is a subtle but really important point. The new law becomes, I must not live under the law. I must constantly check myself to make sure I'm not being legalistic.
Which sounds good, but...
But it's still self-focused. It's still all about what I must do or what I must avoid. It's just a different set of rules you're judging yourself by. And ironically, it becomes a new form of bondage. You're still looking at yourself, not at Christ.
The ultimate paradox, right? Trying so hard not to be legalistic that you become legalistic about not being legalistic.
Exactly. True grace, the source argues, means stopping that intense self-focus altogether and simply relying completely on Christ. It's not about switching from one set of rules to another or even focusing on avoiding a set of rules. It's about living by moment reliance on Jesus himself.
And this is where John 15.5 comes in, the vine and the branches.
Absolutely. It's one of the most foundational statements Jesus made. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing.
Apart from me, you can do nothing. That's such a sweeping, almost startling statement. It really challenges our innate self-reliance, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Our source draws this parallel back to Romans, where the law, as we discussed, actually stimulates sinful passions and leads to what Paul calls fruit for death.
Fruit for death, like that plastic apple you mentioned. Looks like fruit, but has no life.
Exactly. It might look good. It might even smell vaguely fruity, but there's no life. No nourishment, no substance. Gratitude, produced by the law, by compulsion or obligation, is just like that. It's superficial, it's unsustainable, and ultimately, it leads to inner bitterness and resentment because it's forced, it's performative, it's a facade, not a genuine outgrowth of life within.
But the alternative, the fruit of the Spirit.
Right. True character traits, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These are presented as the spontaneous, natural outflow of being connected to Christ, of remaining in the vine, drawing life from him.
Our misconception, though, is often, okay, apart from Jesus, maybe I can't do the big stuff like miracles or converting thousands, but surely I can handle the everyday things of my job, my finances, raising my kids.
Yeah, we compartmentalize, but Jesus' statement is absolute. You can do nothing apart from me. Not just the miraculous stuff, but literally nothing that bears true, lasting spiritual fruit. Nothing that genuinely transforms you or your children from the inside out.
And accepting that requires a pretty fundamental shift in perspective, doesn't it? The source talks about faith being about seeing things the way God sees them.
That's a key part of it. Faith involves agreeing with God's perspective. And God, in his perfect holiness, sees no inherent independent good in our flesh, in our purely human efforts. He sees all humanity in our natural state as having fallen short, as fundamentally corrupt, with even our very best good deeds, when done in our own strength or for our own glory, as like filthy rags.
That's humbling.
It is humbling. But faith aligns with this view, not for self-condemnation, but to then fully appreciate the incredible abundance and perfection found only in Christ. It's about letting go of our illusion of self-generated goodness to embrace his actual perfect goodness given to us.
So the key takeaway here isn't about which law you live under, or even if you're trying hard to avoid all laws.
No, that's still focusing on the wrong thing. The fundamental point is who or what your heart truly relies on. Who is your ultimate source of life, goodness, and strength? True grace means your reliance is completely and utterly on Jesus, not on your own efforts, your own morality, or even your current spiritual state.
And if you're constantly worried about whether you're under the law or not under the law,
you're likely still stuck in a self-focused, performance-based mindset, which is ironically still a form of living by the law, just maybe dressed up in different clothes. It's a subtle distinction, but incredibly powerful.
Okay, this brings us right back to that very real practical dilemma for grace-minded parents. They hear all this and think, okay, if the law makes kids worse or just reveals their sin without changing them, then what do I do when they misbehave? Do I just let everything slide? Do I stop saying no?
It's a natural question and a common struggle. But as our source points out, that very struggle often reveals a persistent how-to mindset. What I must do, what method should I use to get the result I want? It's all focused back on our actions, our control, our techniques.
Still trying to fix it ourselves.
Exactly. But Jesus' answer cuts right through all our striving and self-reliance. Apart from me, you can do nothing. This very struggle, this focus on me, what should I do, shows that the focus is still primarily on the problem and on the self, not yet fully shifted to Jesus as the ultimate solution and the source of wisdom for how to respond.
So someone truly living in grace, they don't ignore the problem.
Not at all. They see the problem clearly. They acknowledge the misbehavior. But their immediate instinctive response, their default setting, is to turn to Jesus first. For the wisdom, the patience, the love, the strength to respond appropriately in that specific situation.
That's a powerful distinction. You're not ignoring the issue. You're just changing where you place your reliance for the solution, shifting it from your own limited strength and wisdom to his infinite resources.
Precisely. Our source gives a great, very down-to-earth example. If your toddler is about to stick their finger in an electric outlet, what do?
You will know? You stop them immediately.
Of course. You tell them no, without a second's hesitation, probably with firm authority. But here's the key difference in mindset. Your heart's ultimate reliance isn't solely on the power of your no to keep them safe forever.
What is it on then?
Your true underlying reliance, your source of peace, is on Jesus' care and providence over that child, extending far beyond your immediate control or sight. Your no in that moment is necessary and right, but it cannot prevent all danger throughout their life. Jesus' sovereign care, his providence, is the actual source of deep peace, shielding both the parent and the child from crippling anxiety and ultimate harm, whether physical or spiritual. You act responsibly, but you rest ultimately in him.
Okay, I can see that. Act, but trust. The source then uses the parable of the fig tree from Luke 13, right, to illustrate this idea of human effort versus divine fruit.
Yes, it's a really rich parable for this. Jesus tells of a man who had a fig tree planted in his vineyard. He came looking for fruit on it, but found none.
And there's symbolism here, the fig tree.
Right. Remember what Adam and Eve used to cover themselves after they sinned?
Fig leaves.
Exactly. So fig leaves, and by extension, the fig tree in this parable, often represent human self-effort. Our attempts to cover our sin, our own attempts at self-righteousness, using our own morality or good deeds to appear good on the surface and cover our internal shortcomings.
And the vineyard, Jesus called himself the true vine.
Right. So the vineyard signifies God's life, his kingdom, his intention for genuine spiritual fruit to grow. The owner of the vineyard, representing God, comes looking for grapefruit, true spiritual fruit that flows naturally from his life within us. But instead, he finds only fig fruit.
Human self-righteousness, superficial good works, things done for show or self-validation.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Think about it in modern terms. Actions that might look good on the surface, donating money, helping someone across the street, but are primarily done for external validation, for a photo op, to get praise, to feel good about ourselves.
Like that anecdote the source mentioned about Learn from Lai Feng Day,
Sure.
People rushing to help elders just for show.
Exactly. Sometimes even comically forcing help on them, just for the appearance of virtue, to be seen doing good. That's a perfect picture of the human fig tree. It might produce something that resembles fruit, that looks like a good deed, but it's incapable of bearing true, lasting spiritual fruit, because the motivation isn't genuine love or grace, but performance.
And for Israel at the time, the fig tree represented their reliance on the law.
That's how the source interprets it in this context. Jesus came to Israel, the people he had cultivated, expecting a vineyard bearing God's true fruit, things like love, compassion, humility, mercy. But instead, he found a nation largely steeped in the law, thinking they were holy because they meticulously kept the rules, or thought they did, and as a result, they despised Gentiles and those they labeled sinners. They were, in a sense, married to the law, and instead of bearing fruit for God, they were bearing fruit for death, the fruit of self-righteousness, judgment, and exclusion.
But the parable doesn't end there, right? There's the gardener.
Right, and this shows God's incredible patience in Jesus' intercession. The owner of the vineyard, understandably, wants to cut down the fruitless tree, which echoes John the Baptist's fiery message of impending judgment on those relying on their own righteousness. But the gardener, who clearly represents Jesus, steps in. He intercedes.
He asks for more time.
Yes, he says, leave it alone for one more year and I'll dig around it and fertilize it. If it bears fruit next year, fine. If not, then cut it down. This beautifully illustrates God's patience, his grace, his willingness to extend more time, more opportunity, even when faced with the fruitlessness of human effort.
So the core lesson is inescapable. We just cannot produce true spiritual fruit through the law, through our own striving and rule keeping.
That's the heart of it. When we operate in that law mindset, even when we're sincerely trying to obey God or be good, we risk becoming just a self-righteous fig tree in God's vineyard, looking leafy maybe, but incapable of bearing the true divine fruit that truly nourishes and lasts.
Okay, this leads us directly into looking at some really harmful ways of thinking, some pedagogies that are common in parenting and teaching, even if we don't realize how damaging they can be. Problem number 1, according to the source, that whole good rewards good, bad punishes bad idea.
Yes, the simple cause and effect model we often use, especially to try and foster gratitude, do good, and good things will happen to you.
Why is that flawed? It seems logical on the surface.
Well, it's fundamentally flawed, the source argues, because the real world often just doesn't work that neatly. And kids, they're smart. They figure that out eventually. They see good people suffer, and bad people seem to prosper sometimes. When they realize this inconsistency, that what they were told isn't always true, they can start to distrust the person who told them, feel like they were lied to.
And using threats doesn't help either. Like, I'm your parent, you must honor me, or else.
That approach tends to create bitterness. It damages the core relationship, turning it into this transactional obligation, you owe me this behavior, rather than a bond built on love and mutual respect. Our source shares a really deeply personal story here.
Oh, yeah.
The speaker recalls this vivid childhood memory. A teacher, probably trying to maintain control, falsely told him there was a big screen in the sky, like cosmic CCTV, watching his every single move, ready to report every little transgression.
Wow, that's intense.
It instilled intense fear and torment in him as a child. And when he eventually discovered it was a lie, that realization, the deception itself, caused lasting emotional harm. It's a powerful example of how destructive deception can be, even when the intention might be to promote good behavior.
That's chilling, actually. And it reminds me of that other common example the source mentioned, parents threatening to call police on their kids for misbehavior.
Right, I've heard that too. And apparently actual police departments have had to issue public statements asking parents to please stop doing that, because it makes children terrified of the very people who are supposed to help them if they're ever in real danger. It completely warps their understanding of authority and safety. It creates distrust where there should be security and reliance. It's just a tragic misuse of a vital societal role model.
So these methods, relying on simplistic rewards, punishments, or deception, they backfire. What else does the law do? The source mentioned extremes?
Yes, the source argues that the law, when it's the primary motivator or standard, invariably pushes people towards one of two unhealthy extremes, either weakness or arrogance. It creates this binary.
Okay, weakness how?
Well, if a child, or an adult for that matter, consistently feels they cannot meet the law's demands, if they constantly fall short and are maybe criticized for it, they tend to become self-deprecating. They develop a sense of self-defeat, worthlessness. The source notes, quite strongly, that endlessly criticizing a student in school never makes them better. It always makes them worse. It just strips away their confidence and their desire to even try. Constant condemnation is destructive.
And the other extreme?
Arrogance. Exactly. On the flip side, if someone can achieve the law's demands, or at least believes they can, if they're successful at keeping the rules and maybe get praised for it, they risk becoming proud. They develop this sense of self-righteous superiority and start looking down on others who aren't performing as well.
Like the Pharisees again?
Precisely. The speaker used Peter as a fascinating example from the Bible, how his personality seemed to swing wildly between extreme self-abasement, like when he said, "Depart from me, Lord, I am a sinful man."
Right, after the miraculous catch of fish.
And then moments later, extreme overconfidence, boasting, "Even if everyone else deserts you, I will never deny you, even if I have to die with you." The law, in essence, seems to make people either overly weak and defeated, or overly arrogant and judgmental. It doesn't seem to foster that healthy middle ground of genuine humility combined with true confidence, that balanced character.
So what does this mean for the parent trying to be a spiritual adult in this? We still need rules, right? Kids need boundaries.
Absolutely. It is perfectly acceptable, even necessary, to give children laws, meaning rules, guidelines, boundaries. Because as infants in their development, emotionally and spiritually, they absolutely need guidance, structure, and clear boundaries for their safety and growth. That's not the issue.
So what is the crucial distinction then?
The crucial distinction lies in the parent's heart. Your heart should not be relying on the law, on the rules themselves, to change the child's inner nature. Your ultimate reliance, your hope for transformation, must be placed on Jesus to work in them from the inside out. You provide the external structure, but you trust in a higher power for the fundamental internal change.
That sounds like it could take a lot of pressure off the parent.
It should. If you, as the parent, are still inwardly relying on the law, on their perfect performance, on the power of your rules to make them good, then you will inevitably fall into that trap. You'll reward their success, which can foster pride, and you'll criticize who condemn their failure, which fosters resentment and self-condemnation. Your focus will remain entirely on their performance relative to the law.
But if your heart is fixed on Christ,
if your heart is truly resting in Christ's sufficiency and grace, you can still provide rules and guidance, absolutely. But you won't be constantly surprised or devastated or overly distressed when they fail, because you understand the inherent limitations of the law and the reality of human weakness, both theirs and yours. Your peace comes from Him, His grace, His power to change, not from their flawless performance of your rules.
it's like the source used the analogy of teaching math.
Yeah, teaching a child elementary math. You teach the rules, the formulas, the basic operation. That's like the law of mathematics for that level. But you don't expect that elementary teacher or those basic rules to be the sole and ultimate source of their entire mathematical journey, right? You don't expect them to derive calculus from addition rules alone.
No, of course not.
You give the law the basic rules necessary for that stage, but your hope for their full development, for their true grasp of complex ideas later on, for their ability to apply math creatively, rests elsewhere on further education, on their own developing intellect, on good higher-level teachers.
So we give the law as parents, but our hope for their true transformation rests in Christ.
That's the idea. And many believers, the source warns, get stuck in that new law we talked about, where they just endlessly worry about not being under the law. They're still self-focused, checking their own spiritual pulse constantly, which prevents true freedom and grace. The real goal of all spiritual education ultimately isn't just about behavior modification according to rules. It's about leading the child and ourselves into a living, reliance-based relationship with Jesus.
Okay, this brings us to another big problem area the source identifies. This tendency to view children almost as possessions, which leads to that works for wages dynamic within the relationship itself.
Yes, that mindset of, because I am your parent, because I provided for you, because I sacrificed for you, therefore you owe me, you should do X, Y, or Z for me. That framing, that's exactly a form of works for wages. It turns the relationship into a transaction based on debt and obligation.
And the source says this approach will never result in genuine gratitude.
Never. Unequivocally. It leads to children feeling perpetually obligated, burdened by the need to meet parental expectations, societal norms, traditional values. It creates this deep internal bondage, this feeling of never quite measuring up or paying back the debt, rather than fostering genuine love and free-flowing appreciation.
And when the law in this context, meaning those parental expectations and obligations, constantly pressures their natural, maybe sinful inclinations,
it can build up pressure, like that cooker analogy. It can lead to an eventual, sometimes bitter explosion, maybe even heartbreaking expressions like, I wish I wasn't your child, or deep-seated resentment that poisons the relationship later in life. True gratitude, the kind that springs joyfully from the heart, simply cannot be forced out by obligation or debt.
The source had that striking cultural analogy, the Chinese tradition of hiring professional mourners.
Right. If family members couldn't produce genuine tears at a funeral, they might hire professionals to weep and wail loudly. It perfectly illustrates performing the outward actions of grief, or in our context, gratitude, simply because society expects it, because it's the right thing to do, not because it's genuinely felt from within.
And the parallel was that many Christians might be similarly bound by traditions, expectations, forcing outward acts without inner conviction.
Sadly, yes. Performing acts of devotion, service, or even gratitude because it's expected, because it looks good, creating this false show of spirituality or thankfulness. It becomes an empty ritual devoid of heart.
So true gratitude, then, is fundamentally different. It's a response.
It's a response. It flows spontaneously, naturally from the influence of Christ's life and love within a person. It's an unforced, joyful outpouring, not something that can be taught through compulsion and coercion or making someone feel indebted. Our source puts it very simply. Praise originates from grace.
Forced praise, forced gratitude is just performance.
Just performance, an act. Like those courtiers in history, maybe outwardly showering the emperor with praise for his grace and generosity, while inwardly despising him and plotting rebellion, all because they were forced to perform gratitude out of fear or obligation. That's not real gratitude. It's just self-preservation or manipulation.
Okay, so if forced gratitude, obligation, rewards, and rules don't ultimately work to create genuine thankfulness, what does? Where does the source point us?
It points directly to love and forgiveness as the true fertile ground from which genuine lasting gratitude naturally springs. And the speaker shares another deeply moving personal story from his own childhood that just perfectly encapsulates this.
So what about the exam?
Yes. He talks about how, despite often getting perfect scores and receiving countless rewards for his academic achievements throughout school rewards, which, interestingly, he admits he cannot even recall now as an adult.
They just faded away.
They faded. But he vividly remembers one single specific instance. He failed an important exam. He felt tremendous guilt, self-condemnation, and was bracing himself for severe punishment because his parents normally had high expectations.
What happened?
His parents did not scold him. They didn't punish him for his failure. Instead, they still took him out to play that day, just as they had promised before they knew the results. In that moment of his weakness and failure, they showed him unconditional love and acceptance.
Wow.
And he says this single act of unexpected, unmerited grace, of unconditional love and forgiveness, is the only memory of that specific kind relating to exams and parental response that he cherishes vividly from his entire childhood. That's how profoundly impactful true grace is, especially when contrasted with expected judgment.
That really illustrates how the works for ages mindset actually steals joy, doesn't it? Even if you get the reward you earned, it doesn't have the same impact as unearned grace.
Exactly. When grace, or any good thing, is defined solely by earned reward, it strips away the intrinsic joy, the sheer delight of receiving it freely. Our source tells another simple but really insightful story, the one about the old woman and the noisy children.
Oh yeah, remind us of that one.
Okay, so this old woman was annoyed by kids playing loudly in her yard every day. So she came up with a plan. She went out and offered them each 5 cents a day to play there, claiming their joyful noise made her happy.
Okay.
The kids were thrilled, getting paid to play. Awesome. So they played happily for 3 days, dutifully collecting their 5 cents. But on the 4th day, the old woman came out and said, "Sorry, kids, I can't afford to pay you anymore."
And what happened?
The children got indignant. They felt cheated. They were doing work playing, and now they weren't getting their wages. So they stormed off and never came back to play in her yard again.
Wow. She turned their play into work and then took away the payment.
Precisely. It shows exactly how focusing on payment, on reward, can strip the intrinsic joy right out of an activity that was once purely enjoyable in itself. The game became a job, and when the pay stopped, the job wasn't worth doing anymore.
It's like a motivation killer for anything done purely for love or enjoyment.
You can be, but the opposite is also true, according to the source. When you're operating in grace, when your motivation springs from love or genuine interest, and not just the external reward, you're often more motivated, more joyful, more resilient. You enjoy the activity itself, not just the potential payoff.
Like the speaker's own experience.
What?
Leading long conferences with joy.
Yeah, he mentioned leading long conferences, preaching all day, leading worship, feeling energized and joyful throughout, not because he was seeking recognition or payment, but because it flowed from a genuine wellspring of grace and passion within him. It's that internal, intrinsic motivation fueled by grace that makes even hard work feel less like toil and more like joyful service.
And this loops back to the profound power of forgiveness in generating gratitude.
Absolutely. True love and forgiveness, when given sincerely and wisely, not indiscriminately, but with compassion and truth, are presented as absolutely critical. Those moments when a child messes up, when they show weakness or misbehave, they aren't just problems to be managed. They are actually prime opportunities.
Opportunities for what?
Opportunities to introduce them, perhaps for the first time in a tangible way, to Jesus. To demonstrate his kind of love, his kind of forgiveness right there in your own interaction with them. When they experience that profound, unmerited grace through your love, When they see your willingness to forgive their failure instead of just condemning it, that's when genuine gratitude starts to bubble up.
Gratitude for God's character reflected in you.
Exactly. They become genuinely grateful for God's character, and through experiencing your love and forgiveness, they begin to truly know Jesus and his boundless grace. That gratitude is real, it's deep, because it's a response to unmerited transformative love, not to rules or rewards.
Okay, let's shift to the really practical side of discipline within this grace framework. The source uses this very memorable metaphor, the cane master. Can you unpack that?
Sure. The speaker, who is a pastor preaching grace, explains how he handles discipline with his own young child. Instead of using his own hands, which represent his personal anger or frustration, he uses a designated cane staff. He personifies it, calling it the cane master.
Okay, the cane master. So what does he do?
He tells the child calmly, "If you continue this specific misbehavior, the cane master will have to appear. I don't want this for you, I love you, but the consequence for continuing this action is that he must appear." It externalizes the consequence, separating it somewhat from the parent's immediate emotion.
So the parent isn't the bad guy in the same way.
That's the crucial point, the parental stance. The parent deliberately does not align themselves with the cane master. The parent consistently represents love, compassion, instruction, and the desire for the child's well-being. The cane master, on the other hand, represents the cold, impersonal, but necessary consequence of crossing established boundaries.
So the purpose remains love and instruction, not just punishment for punishment's sake.
Exactly. The parent explains the why behind the rule: this behavior isn't safe, or this hurts others, or this breaks a boundary that helps our family function well. They offer choice and understanding alongside the consequence, rather than just wielding raw power or venting frustration.
And this parallels God's stance with the law.
That's the parallel the source draws. God gave the law, which functions somewhat like the cane master, revealing sin and bringing consequences. But his ultimate purpose wasn't to align himself with the law to condemn humanity. His purpose was to use the law to reveal our desperate need and lead us to Christ. Jesus himself consistently stood with those who knew their weakness, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, the outcasts, and stood firmly against the self-righteous law keepers, the Pharisees, who thought they didn't need grace.
Like the woman caught in adultery, he didn't condemn her.
Right. He didn't condemn her, but he challenged those who were ready to stone her according to the law. He understood the law's true purpose and, more importantly, the condition of the human heart.
So as parents trying to embody Jesus' life, we should resist that urge to simply condemn our children, even when we have to enforce consequences.
That's the application. We should aim to help them understand the need for love, for change, for Christ, even within the disciplinary process. The cane master is cold, unloved, just a consequence. The parent remains the source of warmth, understanding, love, and the pathway to reconciliation and growth.
Yeah.
It's about maintaining the relationship even while addressing the behavior. You're saying, in effect, I love you, and because I love you and want what's best for you, this consequence for your chosen action is necessary right now.
That makes sense. Now, what about the pressure parents feel to prevent all mistakes, to shield kids from everything bad? The source calls this a folly, right?
Yes, the folly of trying to avoid all mistakes. Our source shares another great story to illustrate this point, the one about the seminary dean and the censored newspapers.
Right, tell us that one again.
Okay, so this concerned seminary dean asked a visiting young preacher for advice. How can we possibly raise our children in this world filled with violence, immorality, and all sorts of unhealthy information? The dean's own solution was to meticulously go through the daily newspaper and cut out any offensive articles or pictures before letting his children see it.
Trying to create a sanitized bubble.
Exactly. But the young preacher wisely, and perhaps bravely, responded. He pointed out that children seeing newspapers delivered with mysterious holes cut out of them would only become more intensely curious to find out what was missing. They'd likely seek out uncensored versions outside the home, defeating the whole purpose. Trying to completely shield them often just increases the allure of the forbidden.
That is so true. It's like that constant anti-evil mindset we see, right? The warnings against rock music in one generation, then TV, then the internet, then online shopping. Now it's AI. There's always something new that's proclaimed as the thing that will destroy the next generation.
Always a new boogeyman.
Yeah.
But our source offers this really profound, maybe even jarring counter-argument that just makes you stop and think. Nothing can destroy our next generation except the previous one.
Oof. That's a punch to the gut.
It is, but it's meant to provoke deep reflection. Where does the real, lasting influence and potential damage truly originate? The source argues that if you look at the backgrounds of most people struggling significantly, maybe in prisons, suffering from severe depression, in mental health facilities you often find histories of unhappy homes, damaging parental or teacher guidance, difficult and traumatic childhoods. It's rarely just because they listened to a certain type of music or spent too much time online.
So it's not saying those external things have zero impact.
No, not at all. Boundaries are still important. Media literacy is crucial. But it's shifting the primary focus. The ultimate responsibility for character formation, resilience, and well-being rests more heavily on the quality of the primary relationships and the core foundations laid in a child's life. It means our energy might be better spent less on frantically trying to prevent every single negative external exposure and more on cultivating strong, loving, grace-filled internal foundations within the home and within the child.
Trusting that God's care is sufficient even in a messy, fallen world.
That's the underpinning belief, which leads to perhaps the most profound and, for many, counterintuitive insight in the entire source material, the insight about God's fundamental nature regarding mistakes.
Okay, what is that?
The source posits this. God is not primarily a God whose main goal is to avoid mistakes. Think about it. If his absolute top priority was preventing all error, all failure, all sin, well, being all-knowing and all-powerful, he would have designed things differently from the very beginning. He wouldn't have created a world with genuine free will, knowing the painful consequences that would follow.
So if he's not primarily about preventing mistakes, what is he about?
He is presented instead as a God who magnificently compensates for mistakes.
Compensates, how so?
His omnipotence, his divine power, isn't just shown in his ability to stop bad things from happening, though he certainly can. It's shown perhaps even more gloriously in his incredible ability to take all things, even our errors, our failures, the sins committed against us, the broken pieces of life, and ultimately make them work together for good for those who love him. That's the promise of Romans 8:28.
Even the worst things, like Judas's betrayal.
Even Judas's betrayal, the source points out. The ultimate act of human treachery became, through God's sovereign hand, a necessary part of his divine plan for salvation. So the huge shift in focus for us, for parents, for everyone navigating life, shouldn't be solely on frantically trying to avoid every single mistake, either our own or our children's, or trying to prevent every possible negative outcome. That's an exhausting and ultimately impossible task.
So instead of focusing only on prevention,
our primary focus should shift towards receiving God's compensation through faith, trusting that he is so big, so powerful, so gracious that he can redeem and transform even the things that seem to go terribly wrong, trusting in his ability to bring good out of bad.
That sounds almost too good to be true sometimes, but framing it as compensation. God allowed sin, the source says, precisely to demonstrate his astonishing ability to compensate for it through sacrifice.
That's the theological argument. Like the Old Testament principle of restitution, paying back more than was lost, like 1 ox for 5, suggesting a 120% return. Or the biblical principle of God bringing a 100-fold return for what is given up or lost in his service. Through Jesus' ultimate sacrifice, the greatest compensation imaginable, even our deepest errors, our children's worst mistakes, our family's painful missteps can become unexpected avenues for blessing, for a greater revelation of his grace and power. Holding onto this mindset is key. Focus your energy, your prayers, your faith, not just on avoiding every pitfall, but on confidently expecting God's incredible redemptive compensation when things inevitably do go wrong.
Which leads finally to the ultimate act of parenting in this grace-based view, and maybe just the ultimate act of living faithfully in this complex world.
Which is
entrusting your children fully to God. In a world that feels increasingly overwhelming, filled with readily accessible pornography, violence, confusing information, unsuitable content everywhere, the primary focus shouldn't be on the impossible task of avoiding everything, of trying to control every single external input, while we absolutely need to set wise boundaries and provide guidance.
Our ultimate peace, our foundational strategy, needs to be rooted in deliberately, consciously giving your children to God. Not surrendering them to your own anxieties or to the law's relentless and ultimately ineffective tutelage or to the cold, impersonal consequences of the cane master.
So it's an act of letting go.
It's a profound act of letting go. Releasing that impossible burden of guaranteeing their perfect outcome, it's about choosing to rest in God's sufficiency and truly trusting, not just saying you trust, but deeply trusting that he can help them navigate the complexities of life, that he can transform them from within in ways we never could, and that his loving providence over them is far greater and more effective than any challenge they might face.
Like Moses at the Red Sea. That picture.
Exactly like Moses at the Red Sea. He didn't surrender the Israelites to panic and worry when they were in that utterly dire, impossible situation. the Egyptian army thundering behind them, the impassable sea ahead. What did he tell them? Stand still, be quiet, and see the salvation of the Lord. When we're faced with overwhelming problems, whether in parenting or life, consciously looking to Jesus and trusting the seemingly impossible situation entirely to Him somehow makes the problem shrink in perspective.
So true education, true parenting, in the deepest sense, is ultimately about surrendering our children to Jesus.
That's the ultimate conclusion. And perhaps the most challenging part is realizing that the real change that most needs to happen often isn't primarily in the child. It's in us, the parents.
We need the transformation first.
We need to grasp this grace, this reliance, this trust first. Because only God can truly change a person's heart and inner nature. The law can't do it. Our rules can't do it. Our rewards and punishments can't do it. Trying to force gratitude or goodness through those means only tends to create fear and pretense, leading to lives characterized by either anxious striving or defensive pride, rather than that genuine, spontaneous gratitude that flows freely from a deep, personal experience of unearned grace and transformative truth. It's a fundamental shift from trying to make them good ourselves to trusting God to make them good through His amazing grace.
Wow. Okay, we have really taken a deep dive today. We've explored the true nature of gratitude, how it seems to be nurtured not by rules and rewards, but by love, forgiveness, and really getting this profound understanding of God's liberating grace.
And we saw how those well-intentioned attempts to force gratitude often backfire, leading to resentment or just, superficial performance.
Right. And instead, our role as parents, maybe guided by that cane master metaphor, is more about providing those necessary boundaries and consequences, while our hearts, our deep reliance, rests completely on Christ to do the real work of transforming the inner person.
And perhaps most powerfully, that idea that God isn't primarily a God who avoids mistakes or prevents all failure, but one who magnificently compensates for them. That shift in focus from frantic prevention to trusting His redemptive, all-encompassing power, that alone can free us from such an immense burden.
It really can. This whole deep dive, it really reveals that true, lasting change, maybe especially in families, it often has to begin with us. Perhaps the greatest lesson here for parents, maybe for all of us, is that the path to raising genuinely grateful and transformed children actually starts by examining and allowing God to transform our own hearts, our own fears, and our own ultimate reliance.
It really brings it back home, doesn't it?
It does. And consider this truly poignant reflection that was shared by the speaker in our source material. It's a deeply personal message he wrote, something he would want to share with his own young child in the future. He wrote, "You owe us nothing. We will not force you to be grateful. We will only guide you to know Jesus."
Wow.
He continues, "Having you in our lives helped us truly understand God the Father's love, Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, and the profound joy of being parents. You make us better parents, and for that, we are eternally grateful."
That flips the whole script.
Yeah.
The parents being grateful to the child for what the child taught them about God's love.
Exactly. So think about that for a moment. Just let it sink in.
Yep.
How might your parenting, and maybe your entire life, fundamentally change if you release that heavy burden of making them grateful, of trying to control every outcome, and instead focused your energy, your love, and your faith primarily on guiding them towards a living, transformative relationship with the ultimate source of all love and genuine change?
What does it mean to parent not for future returns, not for guaranteed outcomes based on our efforts, but simply for a shared, joyful life today? A life rooted in and flowing from unearned grace? That's a question that definitely continues to resonate long after this deep dive ends.